Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Cyber Conversations. I'm Kanti. I'm the director of the Cyber Institute. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Donna Gregg. Donna is the head of the Asymmetric Operations Sector at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. She is responsible for approximately 1,600 staff across 4 mission areas, which are focused on the nation's ability to defeat asymmetric threat, whether human-made or naturally occurring. There are other areas of focus, countering weapons of mass destruction, offensive cyber, biological threats, and terrorism. Donna has been at APL since 1984, and she has served in numerous leadership and supervisory roles. She has also served on the Threat Reduction Advisory Committee and the Board of Advisors for the National Institute for Hometown Security, and she serves on the Naval Studies Board. In 2022, she received the Federal 100 Award. Donna, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are really grateful. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm going to just bring up some slides. Give me a second here. Okay, so I thought I would just start. I'll spend the next 15 minutes or so just talking a little bit about some of the work at the laboratory, because I cannot help myself other than talk about the work at the laboratory because it is such a fantastic place to be. I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll talk a little bit about cyber, and at that point, I'll come back to you and we can go anywhere you want. Okay, so let's get started. I like to start with the very beginning of the laboratory. So anybody who's listening to this who's a history buff, we started post-World War II. And by the way, don't worry, I won't dwell here. Just starting here. We started post-World War II, and Merle Tuve was our first director. And what I love about the quote here, our moral responsibility goes all the way to the final battle use of the unit. Its failure there is a failure regardless of who's technically responsible for the cause of the failure. It is our job to achieve the end result. The story behind this was we were the creators of the VT Fuse, which defeated the kamikaze threat in World War II. But Merle Tuve was the guy who wasn't going to let go. He was going to make it happen. And he didn't start at the laboratory. But they created the laboratory to eventually be able to create this capability, which turned into thousands of units deployed in both theaters. There's a great book on this. It's called 12 Seconds of Silence, and I recommend it to anybody who wants to read it. But it's all about what it took for him to achieve this goal. The last thing I'll say about this is if you haven't seen Oppenheimer, I recommend seeing that. That's the story of the nuclear threat during that time. That was another key invention and achievement that we had to make as a nation. And this was something that was going on in parallel. So it's just a really interesting thing, maybe especially to me because I've been at the lab for so long. But it's inspiring, and it really set the stage for the laboratory, and I think very much the spirit of the place that really is still there today. Okay, so to that end, and again, I promise I'll get into cyber, but I want to start with an achievement that came out of a mission, and this came out of our space department, and this was a mission to Pluto. And it started in 2009, and it was called New Horizons. And that picture that you see there that's all fuzzy is the picture that we had of Pluto in 2009. It took 9 years for New Horizons to be able to get to Pluto, and the pictures that we now have of Pluto are absolutely stunning. And so I just can't resist showing this because it's just so fantastic. But this is what you can achieve in a career in STEM. So we're going to talk about cyber, but this shows you, other places where STEM comes to play, and it's just amazing. Like you can't make something like that up. So I just offer that because it's just so much fun. Okay. I'll say one other thing about the work at the laboratory, and that is the work during the pandemic. Maybe not as compelling as Pluto, but pretty darn good. And here we were the team behind a lot of the data that was used across the nation to make decisions during COVID. And you may be sitting there saying, really? But what I would say was we were the ones that were processing the data, and it was really messy data and very, very difficult. And very uneven in when it became available and how it got collected. But rest assured, and at the beginning, of course, we had no data availability to collect data and process data. rest assured, we grappled with that and finally got our arms around it and creating a capability that exists now to this day. Luckily, we don't need it at this point, but these pictures in front of you are just kind of a summary of the impact that we ended up having building this capability, starting with a picture in the White House, which is one of my favorites. If you look in the lap of the vice president there, that briefing book has our analysis in it. And so I'm proud of that. And I feel like we really helped the nation during this period of time. Okay, now I'll talk about myself for a couple seconds. And that is, I did start at the laboratory. Actually, I was a new grad coming out of University of Maryland, and my degree was in mathematics. And in the early days, I worked on modeling and simulation. So it was really an analytical job, analysis. And we were looking at communications to our submarines. And that particular mission just happened to grab me. It was strategic in nature. It's still strategic in nature, really important for our nation. But the analytical part was why it was good for me as a mathematician. What happened in the 90s, maybe the late 80s, networking started to boom. Sorry to admit it, but I remember when the first personal computers arrived at the laboratory. So we were mainframe when I first joined the laboratory. But the world started to change, and we needed to adapt and understand the challenges that were going to come about as that change happened. And that's really where I started making the shift over to cyber. And it really was in the early 90s. It was like 1992, maybe, that we began to talk about it seriously at the laboratory. We can come back and talk about anything you want with regards to the journey of how I jumped from submarine communications to the bottom of this chart, which is now I lead this big organization. And the organization is focused on asymmetric threats. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. But there is a lot of real estate between mathematician coming out of University of Maryland all the way to running a very large, dynamic, and what I consider to be a very important organization. The only other thing I'll say is on the bottom right of this chart, that's a picture of the fellow who really created probably the first cyber attack. It's called the Morse worm, so you can Google that and find out about that. But as early as networking emerged, the attackers were already emerging at that point, which is interesting. Okay, so a couple words on asymmetric threats. This just kind of gives you a plethora of pictures that show it, and all the way on the right you see COVID. So COVID actually was an asymmetric threat. We didn't anticipate it. Had never seen it before. We needed to grapple with it. It was out of the blue. Those are the characteristics of what I would call an asymmetric threat. And they're hard to grapple with. They really are things that you can't anticipate. You have to be very agile and adapt very well. Some of the other pictures here, all the way to the left, a lot of the discussion that we've had in our country about the voting systems. Regardless of what the facts were, we need our voting systems to work and be secure. So that's a great place where cyber plays. Solar winds, or could have easily put other pictures like the Colonial Pipeline there. That really speaks to our networking infrastructure or our critical infrastructure. And we know cyber attacks are happening there. And then the other two pictures really talk to more other types of asymmetric threats that we grapple with. One is in the chem bio space, and how easy is it now for folks to get hands-on and be able to create those kinds of threats. And then I put the China Belt and Road Initiative up here because it's a very interesting strategy that China has to grow their influence across the world, where they are helping nations through low interest rate loans, giving them the ability to build critical infrastructure. Very much the types of things that the United States has done in the past in terms of partnering with nations and helping them. But it's an important, and I'd call asymmetric approach to them gaining influence across the world. So really interesting set of challenges, interesting times that we live in. Okay, so moving to, again, talking about the organization I lead, I wanted to share the competencies that we have, because you all are off studying, and you've got lots of opportunity right now as you think about the things that you want to study and the challenges that you want to focus on. And so here are 6, and I won't dwell on any of them, but I would ask you to think about it as you're picking your coursework. And so on the upper left is the Applied Information Sciences organization. here is where artificial intelligence and data science is emerging, and it's booming, right? I mean, this is a fast emerging field. I encourage anybody, and this is good for mathematicians, by the way, but also good for computer scientists. But any of you who are inspired in this space, go study it. There is much to be developed, much application in this space. How do we use this to great outcomes? And there's a tail on this. How do we do it safely, ethically, and securely? So cyber lives in this space as well. Communication systems, anybody who is inspired to work on, well, actually, just if you've got a cell phone in your pocket, that's a communication system, right? So there's just a plethora of great challenges in the communication space. I encourage anybody with an interest there to study that area. We've got a vibrant organization there at APL. Cyber operations, I'll let you tease out what that all may mean. We'll come back to it, but part of our organization, of course, is focused on cyber operations, both the securing of cyber and understanding how the offensive side plays in that particular game. The lower left, cyber physical systems. I teased you a little bit of this when I said Colonial Pipeline, but so much of our critical infrastructure in the country resides on information systems, and how do we secure them? And not only that, embedded in our critical infrastructure are what we call operational technology, OT, and these are industrial control systems, and they too have cybersecurity implications. And then in the center on the bottom, electromagnetic sensing. This is work we do to build sensors. And there I would just say, if any of you are interested in engineering, there's a great body of work associated with building small special purpose sensors. And then on the bottom right is the chem bio. I indicated a little bit of this in the asymmetric threat, but again, vibrant careers in chem engineering, bio, the biological sciences, biosecurity. So that kind of covers the breadth of competencies we've got in my part of the organization. And I encourage you, in any of these competencies, all of them would lead to very vibrant and important problems and to research and think about. Okay, so now finally moving to cyber. What I would say here is the work that we're doing, we focus on national security. So we're really focused on our military systems. So in the lower left, you see a nod to Navy. The systems that our Navy are using are more constrained than you might think about when you think about enterprise networks. But we should be thinking about how do we secure those systems. So we have a lot of work that we're doing in sensing the environment. What do you do if you detect something nefarious going on? How do you do that at the speed and scale that you need to in an operational environment? These are all really important challenges that we're focused on. And then on the lower right, I mentioned Colonial Pipeline. This gets into the industrial control systems. These systems, much like a lot of our networking technology, were originally built with no thought to cyber at all. We put the Morse worm aside. We were not focused on the adversaries coming in and trying to mess with our systems. And so they were built with not that in mind. So we have to go back now and figure out, how do you sense the environment? How do you detect what's going on? And then what the heck do you do about it? And so that's the body of work that we're focused on. And again, it ties very much back to critical infrastructure for our country.
Gets onto the ICS network, sends commands that could damage the system. The system is very limited in terms of network security, so adding new security measures can be very effective. To stop attacks like this, we employ the Network Deception and Response Toolkit, DART. Using software-defined networking, we reroute adversary commands to decoy controllers so that they think they're manipulating the system, but in fact have no effect.
DART is configured to look for unusual traffic, sending it to these decoy controllers and protecting the real systems. And if attackers return, we can detect them and protect our system.
Given the traffic, it looks like the hacker is back. They're trying to start the backflush system, and it's coming from this location on the network.
With the network DART in place, the adversary can see the commands being sent to specified PLCs, obtain the correct response, but is unaware that the real ICS network is unaffected. Overall, APL is developing a number of tools to better protect ICS networks and the nation's critical infrastructure, including the use of decoy.
Anyway, I couldn't resist throwing in a video. So that's the team that I have working on the industrial control systems. And they're just a fun bunch, and they are enthused, and they are chasing this problem, and it's really terrific. So that's my plug for my team. Okay. The last piece of work that I'll just talk to you about, because I think it is very much in this information space, and I'll say in the I would include the cyberspace, and that is this explosion of information that exists, and what we talk about is publicly available information. And so what we're doing is we're curating that data to study it for all kinds of purposes. And so this is just a snapshot. It's a little bit of an old snapshot at this point. But here, the challenge is, how can this be used for mal purposes? And so what we want to do is be able to curate the data, understand what's going on in the environment, and really track how the influence is happening. So for example, we saw a lot of this, although I will be quick to say, so what I would say, a lot of this unfolded around COVID with vaccines. I mean, so the influence that happened at that time was incredible. Could we have done that better? Could we have helped shape the messages better, get the word out in a different way? That's kind of the set of competencies that is behind this information and influence domain. And so although not directly cyber and cyber defense or cyber offense, it still is in that information domain. And if you're inspired in this space, it really ties more to the data science part. And I would say, again, a very important area to study. And we're really grappling with a set of problems in this space. Okay. So now I'll just end with what would be my advice to you. And again, we can pull on any of these things as you ask me questions. But what I would say is, the core disciplines, engineering, computer science, math, physics, biology, they are still the core degrees of choice. And I encourage you in all of these spaces. I would put computer security as well as on this list as well. So I didn't write it, but I would not say you shouldn't study that. I think that is a fine degree to study. I would say be open about the new opportunities and challenges. There are many of them. And so I would just be curious. And, if you're listening to this talk, hopefully I've opened up a few new avenues for you to think about. Eventually, I would also advise you to have mentors, seek out people who you can get trusted advice throughout your career. If you're interning somewhere, when you're in those organizations, try to find those people who will help you. And when you get your first job, seek those mentors out. These are people who have been there, they've seen a lot in their career, and I think can really advise you. And so I can't emphasize that enough. And then finally, I'll just say, whatever you do, be passionate about it and commit to it. You should like what you're doing. So if you end up somewhere where you are not passionate or you are bored, you are not doing the right thing. So don't settle. Keep looking for the things that are going to inspire you and get you up and in and interested every single day. And you will just have a lifetime of exciting, important, and interesting and wonderful work to do. And so with that, I'll just pause.
Thank you for sharing that presentation. I love that picture of Pluto.
It's incredible.
It is incredible.
Right.
Oh, Pluto.
Our non-planet or whatever it became.
I know, poor thing. Like, anyway, it's a whole other topic that we can go off of on a tangent. But that presentation was so fantastic, and especially the advice you have on there, the core areas, they are still the core areas because there's a reason. We need more competent people. We need more qualified, skilled people working in all of these areas. And I have to say, until a few months ago, when I made, when we were introduced, I didn't know the full scope of what APL did. I knew of the applied physics lab. I just didn't know the full range of, the kind of work that went in there, the kind of research that went in there. So I'm very glad that I know now there are so many other avenues, right? One of the things, or one of the more current things, I should say, is the biological threats. The one we had, there were so many conspiracy theories surrounding COVID. We may never know the truth, but that was one aspect that I thought was really fascinating, right, from a researcher's point of view, not in
Yeah.
general public, but from a researcher's point of view, that was a fascinating case study. So anyway, I have a few questions that I curated for you and some that popped up while you were talking as well. So you started at the APL in math. So how did that come about? Like, how did you first start at APL? Did you
Mhm.
apply? Were you recruited?
Yeah.
What was the process like?
Yeah, so I'll back up just to say one thing about math, and that is for whatever reason, and can't even really tell you why, I knew that whatever career I picked, I wanted it to be in the math and sciences because I knew that this was going to be I would end up doing work that was going to be critical for the country, and no matter what, there would always be really important work there. Now, I cannot tell you why I knew that as an 18-year-old, but I did. So I don't know if there was something that we were nationally messaging to our students that made me understand that, but I understood it at a very young age, and I knew I was going to go into some kind of math science thing. I ended up in math, quite frankly, just because I could do it. So that was why I ended up picking math in particular. The lab is a very interesting place, and many this may not be true now, but it was true in the mid 80s. We were much smaller, and the answer was, I have a very good friend whose father worked at the laboratory, and I was getting ready to graduate, and he knew I was getting a degree in math, and he just said off the cuff, "You ought to apply at the laboratory." And so what I ended up doing is I actually applied at multiple places. I got offers from every place that I applied to. One was more of a studies house. One was actually an insurance organization because of actuarial work that's good for mathematicians. And the third was the laboratory. The reason I picked the laboratory was the first mission. So again, I got hooked knowing, I was going to work on something that, no kidding, was going to matter. And two, I loved the people I interviewed with. And I will tell you, those people are my friends to this day, and I've never regretted it. And so now just kind of to your audience, so my advice to you all is, as you go off and you start interviewing, use that as a guide. If you're interviewing with people and you like them and you are, and it grabs you, listen to that, because it holds you well. It really will hold you well. So.
And that stands so true, even for any other job as well. Not just the interview or the people who are interviewing you, but when you go into the company, if you're doing a physical in-person interview, when you go inside to take a tour, you get the general feel for how it will be for you to work there. So
it's, in every organization, there is a culture, and, you have to assess, is this culture for me? Is this where it's going to be my home? And I know, people move around a lot, much more frequently than they did when I was starting out. But my hope is that the laboratory people will still come and be grabbed by the culture, and will spend their career there.
I love that. So you shared about some of your journey as, with your team, what they do and the different branches in there, and you oversee many missions. Can you share any insights into some of the more significant accomplishments or the more significant projects that were handled by the team?
Yeah. So one that I spoke about, I would go back to, is COVID. And and here's the interesting story there. That was unfolding. We were people were going home. We were shutting down. I'm talking about nationally. We were, closing organizations all over the place. We got a call, and I believe it was from FEMA, and they were trying to figure out, grappling with it. And this is just kind of the spirit of the workforce that I have. Our team ran down there in those spaces to begin grappling with the problem with our sponsors. And I just I'm so grateful for them. But just the spirit of that, we're all sitting there wondering, what is this thing? How does it transmit? What's going to happen to us? And they're in those spaces getting it done. They were down there, close quarters every day, putting in the hours. And out of that, what evolved was that data back end that we ended up building to support the dashboard that Hopkins. So Hopkins put the first dashboard up. We were the ones that built the back end to that so that it could sustain at scale. It started as really it was a professor who started that, and it was how do you keep that thing up and running, and then it evolved from there, just in terms of the analytics that were needed. So it evolved quite a bit from there. But I view that as a very current, huge contribution that that my team made on behalf of the country.
And that's such a, I'm pretty sure I've used the word fantastic a couple of times, but I don't know any other word to use. So I will say that's one extraordinary achievement, because that data was so helpful that everybody was using it. So
it's yes, and as the pandemic progressed, we had to become more and more sophisticated about what the metrics were. So if you remember, at one point in time, everything was deemed red, but we knew we were deeper and deeper into the pandemic and people were getting their vaccines, and it wasn't the right, it was number of occurrences or something, I think is what the metrics were. And our sponsors and our team knew that was not the right metric anymore. Things had changed. What did a hotspot look like late in the pandemic was very different than what a hotspot looked like early on. So there was innovation that had to happen. And in that case, it was our team working with our sponsors to figure out what was the right set of new metrics that we had. And so that came out as this whole thing progressed over a couple of years.
that actually gives me a nice little segue into the next question that I have. You have a degree in math, but you are now in a leadership position. So how can someone, anybody that wants to be there, how can someone develop the skills, right, to be able to balance that technical aspect of their degree with their leadership as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I would be very quick to say where I am in my career technically is living on what I learned a long time ago. So don't look to me to come up with, the new innovations. So here's what I would say. You start out early in your career, you really are working on technical work. You've got fresh skills at that point, and there are many people, and I'll speak to the laboratory, many people who remain that way throughout the course of their career. And these are extraordinarily valuable people. They are the backbone of the laboratory. And it is a fruitful, exciting, and wonderful career for those that go that route. What is required is continual learning, because things change. I mean, what things look like, in the early 90s are nothing like what things look like today. And you have to be open to continually learning. But that's the fun of it, right? I mean, if you were doing the same thing every day, I think that becomes very boring. And I think, it's just not the fun thing. For those of us that go more leadership route, you still start out very technical, and my advice there is learn your lessons well, and hone your ability to understand what people are sharing with you. Because at this point, what happens is I'm often in a review capacity looking at what we're doing and needing to quickly understand what they're talking to me about and whether or not we need to go in a different direction or continue down a particular path. And all of that, I couldn't even tell you how I've developed the ability to do that, but it has come from doing real, what I call real work, and evolving my ability to understand what's going on across our workforce. But I too am not out from under continual learning, right? So if something new comes out, the latest being large language models, it's on me to be able to go, I need to go read about it, understand it. In my case, I have the luxury of being able to ask my folks for a brief. So go teach me. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to do that, but I do get to do that. But it is my responsibility to keep up with what's going on, understand what's going on, and to be able to grapple with it, because I'm making decisions, investment decisions, directional decisions, and you have to do that with knowledge.
That actually answered another question of mine that I had on my list. But since, this kind of gives me a nice opening into another one, you've been at APL for a while now. So what are some changes that you've seen in how we deal with, threats as the time went on, like how have threats changed? They've evolved, obviously,
Yeah.
but from smaller scale to physical attacks to now more cyber attacks as well. So how do you, or what changes have you seen in the way that we handle these threats?
Yeah. So I'd start with a very high level discussion about kind of the geopolitical environment. And that is, in my early days, we were Cold War and kind of, one adversary that we were focused on. And then, of course, went through the terrorism, what I call the terrorism era, not that that's gone. And now we're into this environment where, many nations are now, let's just say active in the cyberspace. And so it's definitely evolved across that time span. So in terms of the threats, I think so now I'll just talk about commercial industry. So in the cyberspace, commercial industry has stood up to many of the capabilities that we now have and use on our enterprise systems. Thank heaven. And they're going to have to continue evolving those capabilities. And I think they do a terrific job at dealing with those threats, although we both know, every day there's something else that goes on. But I would just make a plug for innovation in the commercial space for enterprise systems. I think, earlier you and I were talking about the threats are multifaceted. So what I just spoke to are really the technical issues that still exist in our information systems because of their complexity. There's an equal set of challenges around the people component, just around configuring their systems, using their systems. It's hard to be an expert and be able to do that perfectly. That component is always going to be there. And so I think that's just kind of an Achilles heel. So those who want to kind of think about the human aspect of this problem and how we improve there, I think there's a fruitful set of challenges to think of there. And then the last thing that I would say, though, is then there are systems that exist where I think commercial industry doesn't play so much. And those are some of the ones that I spoke about. It's the industrial control systems, our critical infrastructure systems, our military systems. And that's where really the national labs comes in. And so I would say APL plays in that space, but we're not the only ones that play in that space. Sandia plays in that space. MIT Lincoln Laboratory plays in that space. So there are lots of organizations worried about those systems. And I suspect our what we call the prime contractors, big DoD contractors, will develop the solutions in that space and are developing the solutions in that space. And so that has progressed, as we've gone on in time, we kind of were more focused on the enterprise systems, need to maintain attention there. But now we've got these special purpose systems that we really need to pay attention to and figure out how we're going to build those securely, and maintain that security as they mature.
One of the points that you mentioned, humans, that aspect, I think is one of the more critical issues that we need to focus on right now. I teach a class and it's cyber law and policy. And this is one point that I always tell my students is humans are the weakest link when it comes to security. Whether it's intentional, unintentional, it doesn't matter, but we are the weakest link when it comes to security in any form. And that's one of my interests. I like to learn more about the human component, when it comes to security. So
yeah, when you guys figure that out, let us know what to do. It's hard. And it's because there's such a variety of, we're all using computers, whether it's a cell phone in your pocket or, we're all using computers. We're all human. So it's just a hard part of this problem. Yeah.
It really is. And I think one of the solutions, or not necessarily a full solution could be, but something that can be implemented is through policies, right? More stronger policies, more stronger penalties, if you will, to breaking the policies as well, and follow through of those penalties as well. Not just saying, oh, we're going to fine you this, but actually fine them that, or something like that. Maybe.
I don't know. I've thought about this a lot. My current thinking is we need to keep educating everybody. And because I just think there's no easy answer to this. I mean, I don't think technology is a silver bullet, but we need technology. I'm not saying we don't need technology. But I mean, we're talking about information systems that are in small mom and pop, I mean, all of our individual businesses across the country, all the way up into our big enterprise systems and our government systems. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, my current thinking is educate, and try to get as many people savvy about this as possible. How we scale to meet that, I do not know. Will it really help at the end of the day? I don't know. But that's my current, that's kind of like my current thinking, like, oh gosh, we need more people at this.
Exactly.
Stuff.
More people need to be aware of what's going on out there, not just, in the physical landscape, but also in the cyber landscape,
Yep.
different threats. And cyber is not just a one person issue, it's everybody's issue.
It is.
So earlier in your presentation, you had mentioned 6 technical branches at the APL. Do you have a favorite of all the 6?
There's
We're
no
putting you
way
on the
you're gonna
spot.
suck me into that answer. What I would no, I don't. They are all so vital to what it is that we're trying to do. So but yeah, I treat all my branches the same.
So when we were talking about infrastructure, right, or the physical infrastructure for many things, they were built a while ago, and you were talking about, making adjustments to those as we go along, as more threats pop up. So what are some common adjustments or that existing infrastructure can make, or if they're building new structures, what are some things that the focus should be on?
Yeah. What I would say, I mean, just kind of starting very simply, I think our critical infrastructure owners need to know what their systems are actually connected to. And I know we talk about that all the time, knowing your cyber terrain. But I think many times we think those systems are isolated, and they're not isolated. And, so once you open it up to the internet, you're opened up. And I understand why. I mean, this has been the internet has been a boon to maintenance and the maintainability of these systems. I totally get it. You don't have to send people out, walking along pipelines anymore to, make changes. But so I understand the need, and I think the need, it's going to have to be maintained, but at least know when you're connected, know how you're connected. And so that's just kind of very important, like first step. The second thing though, actually, let me just say one more thing about that. Back to the Colonial Pipeline incident, I actually think what got them was not the Colonial Pipeline infrastructure piece. I think it was their billing system that ended up getting accessed. And that was what concerned them. And that's what made them take fast action. So just, again, it just shows you the play between, there's the critical infrastructure systems, but there's still the tail, associated with more of the what I would call the IT systems. The second thing that I would say is we've got to get eyes now on the industrial control portions of the system. So this is pure sensing and detecting what's going on in those environments. And again, I'll just talk about the laboratory. We've worked that problem in particular, and have built systems to be able to sense what normal looks like in those environments, and then be able to ring up if something comes on the environment that we don't expect. And so we've actively built that technology and have deployed it in test beds and tested it out. But because those products just inherently don't have that capability, we're going to have to do some of this patching. The other approach that we've taken, which I think is also very interesting, is having I always call it Plan B. So Plan A, you're going to get had. I mean, let's just face it; it is inevitable. Every system's going to get had, but but having a backup plan, a backup system, so that you can quickly recover is important. So here I would just talk about virtual PLCs in this case, and so we've done some work there, and I think that technology is commercially available now, so that you can refresh and restore very quickly when the inevitable happens. So those are a couple of thoughts. But I would say, go ask the people working on it. They'll have a much better answer than me.
But yeah, always having a nice backup plan, no matter what situation, no matter what industry you are in, if it's a small, mom and pop shop, if it's a big company, doesn't matter. It always
Have a
pays
backup
to
plan.
have a
Yeah.
backup plan, exactly. We are running out of time, so I have a couple more questions for you. One is two-pronged. What are some advancements in technology that you think we'll be able to make in the next, 20 years or so? And the second point is, what are some challenges that you think those advancements in technology will present to us?
Yeah. So I don't know if I can look out 20 years, but what I can tell you is the fast moving train right now is in this data science, artificial intelligence space. The innovations that are happening there are stunning. I mean, absolutely stunning. I don't know if you all have played with, Chat GPT or any of the large language models that are coming out, but they are just knock your socks off stuff. So I think there is tremendous potential in that space for, and we're only now grappling with how to use it. So in fact, as recent as yesterday, I was getting a brief on some work that we were doing, and I was beginning to see, I can see a set of front ends that we could build to the large language model, suite of capabilities, and then start applying them to the problems that we see. I mean, all of that thinking is just emerging. I think the challenges that come with that are ethical, so I think, and I have people who work in the laboratory, very worried about how this technology is going to be used. And I think we owe it to be thinking very deeply about that. I have no answers, right? I do not have any answers, but what I do know is we need to be developing the technology with that in mind, and have the tools and capabilities that maybe developers could use to be mindful when they're developing capability. But that is just emerging, and I don't know where it's going to land, but I do know we need to take, we need to lead the charge there, to make sure these capabilities don't get used for, for bad purposes. So that's what I would say. Again, I'll make a plug for Oppenheimer. That movie was so interesting because it was what they were grappling with. It's very similar, right? But in that case, it was, nuclear weapons, which, like big outcome, big impact. So, I don't mean to equate the two, but they too, as scientists, were grappling with, like, we're creating this. What does this mean? And what's it going to mean? And I think we're kind of at that same frontier now in this artificial intelligence space. So.
AI seems to be the way to go forward. I mean, we've been waiting, or not waiting necessarily, but we've been hearing about artificial intelligence for quite some time now. But to see it actually, many tools now pop up, it seemed like it blew up overnight.
Right.
Out of nowhere, all of these tools out there, all of these resources that people can use, and it's fascinating. So I want to wrap up our session with a last question, one which you already talked about, is the advice that you can give to any young person that is watching this video right now.
Yeah, so I don't know, I'll just kind of reiterate a couple of things. One is, be passionate about whatever it is you pick. That will hold you well throughout your life. So you got to love it, right? Whatever you're doing, you got to love it, because you spend a lot of time, chewing on these problems. So be passionate about it, be committed, work hard. There is no replacement for working hard and studying hard. Yeah, so work hard and be committed. That will really take you a long, long way. And then finally, try to pick degrees that are really going to sustain you throughout the set of problems that we will be looking at nationally for a long period of time. And of course, I've got a bias in the national security space, but it doesn't have to be national security. I mean, there are hard problems in health that are equally important. And, I mean, use your imagination in many, many different walks of life. So I just paused there. That's what I would say.
That is actually very good advice. You need to make sure you are, if not loving the work you do, at least liking it, right? You need to have it. If you don't like what you're doing, you're just going to get bored,
never-
you're going to get frustrated, and
They'll
that's
never
just
stick.
not
Right.
a good thing
Yeah.
all around. So you need to at least like the work that you're doing. And yeah, and with the number of technology issues that we're having, the number of challenges that will potentially come up in the future, picking a degree, picking a career that will help you solve at least, or even contribute to solving those problems, could be a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to thank you so much again for being on Cyber Conversations with us today. I'm really, really grateful.
Thanks for asking me. I enjoyed the time with you.